Welcome back. We're glad that you've joined us again for another seminar on the gifts of the Spirit. And for those of you who have just joined us and just tuned in and have never been with us before, we'd like to welcome you too. We'd also like to have you write in and tell us about whether or not you're enjoying the sessions or whether or not you have any questions, because we're certainly desirous to answer any of them for you as well. Last time we were discussing further understanding on the sounds and syllables regarding different languages, and then we asked the question, could the devil speak in tongues? But today we want to ask the question, did Jesus speak in tongues? Ooh, well, let's find out about this one. Let's turn, please, to Matthew chapter 27. I'm going to go into several different portions of Scriptures. We're going to read them all at once, and then we're going to just discuss them very briefly to find out whether or not, indeed, Jesus did speak in other languages. This is the story in Matthew chapter 27, verses 45 to 47, and this is when Jesus had died on the cross. And he is... They're saying here in the Scriptures, now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land unto the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, that is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And some of them that stood there, when they heard this, said, This man calleth for Elias. Now would you also like to turn to Psalms chapter 22 and verse 1. This is the reference given by David way back when the writing of the Psalms. Verse 1 says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me and from the words of my roaring? Now, let's go please then to the story of the raising of Jairus' daughter from the dead in Mark chapter 5. And we will see here a very significant story. Verse 22, Behold, there comes one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet, and besought him greatly, saying, My little daughter lies at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. And Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. Now you find out a little bit later, as you go down to about verse 35, that the ruler of the synagogue said, Your daughter is dead. Why do you trouble the master any further? And as soon as Jesus heard the words that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, Be not afraid, only believe. Now he takes James and John and his brother into to the damsel where she was laying. And verse 40, they laughed him to scorn, and when he had put them all out, he takes the father and mother of the damsel and them that were with him, and entered in where the damsel was lying. And he took the damsel by the hand and said to her, Talitha cumi, which is being interpreted, Damsel, I say unto thee, arise. And straightway the damsel arose and walked, for she was of age of 12, and they were astonished with great astonishment. And he charged them, of course, that they should tell no man about it. I don't know how you're supposed to keep the raising of the dead quiet, but anyway, he told them not to tell anybody. Now we go to Mark chapter 7, verses 31 to 37. And he departed out of the coast of Tyre and Sidon, and he came to the Sea of Galilee through the midst of the coast of Decapolis. And they bring unto him one that was deaf and had an impediment in his speech, and they beseech him to put his hand upon him. And he took him aside from the multitude, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spit and touched his tongue. And looking up into heaven, he sighed and said unto him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. Now, let's go into another portion of Scripture in John chapter 11. This is the story of Lazarus being raised from the dead. Very exciting story. And certainly one that excites us as we look at the variety of the gifts of the Spirit that are exercised here. Looking at verse 33, this is where Mary had come to him and said, Lord, if you hadn't been here, my brother wouldn't have died. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. Go down, please, then, to verse 37. Some of them said, Could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind have caused that even this man should not have died? Jesus, therefore, again, groaning in himself, comes to the grave. Now, also, would you like to go to Romans chapter 8, and we want to see verses 23 and 26. And we discussed this when we were talking about receiving the fullness of the Spirit, and The fact that the Spirit helps us with our infirmities. This was several sessions ago. But verse 23 says, and not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body. So now as we see this, there is a groaning in the Spirit, and we're mentioning that when we are groaning in the Spirit, that is praying in the Spirit, correct? We discussed that in one of our other seminars. Now the question is, did Jesus speak in tongues? Is he speaking in tongues in these few places? Now I realize that there are many theologians who have studied this. I'm not going to give a hard and fast rule and say, yes, I think Jesus was speaking in tongues here in these places. They say that Jesus was speaking in Aramaic, that when he died on the cross and he said, how did that go? Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That he was indeed speaking in a language that was known, and that it was the language of that day. What I would wonder about is, though, that I believe in every different Bible it's written just this way. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. I can hardly say it anymore now. And it's written in every Bible. And then it's written in the language that the Bible has been translated into. So most theologians will say that indeed this is the language that they know. There is also these other two incidences when the ears were opened and when Jairus' daughter was raised from the dead. These few words that were spoken, they say he was again speaking in Aramaic. I have a little bit of a question on this. And again, I'm not questioning the theologians if indeed they have actual fact on it. But some of them are not too sure where they're at, and some of them are a little bit desirous to know. If he was speaking in Aramaic, and I understand that he spoke in this quite frequently, and I understand it was the language of the day, just like Yiddish is the language of the Jews, why is it that on those few occasions that he spoke this, why did they even bother to say which is interpreted? Why didn't they just say this is what he said? As he spoke in that language all the time, why didn't he just say that's what it was, without having to say this is what is interpreted? Now the fact that we look at Jesus, who prayed in agony of spirit. And then there were many times, of course, that Jesus went out into the mountainside to pray. Was he praying in the Spirit at that time? Now, I've had people say to me, well, yeah, but Jesus was God. He didn't need to pray in the Spirit. All right, let me ask you another little simple question. If Jesus was God, which indeed he was, why did he pray at all? Why did he pray at all? He didn't need to pray then at that rate. So I personally don't find a problem by saying, well, did Jesus pray in the Spirit or didn't he pray in the Spirit? There is something that I do know about Jesus. He was in full control of himself, of his faculties at all times. He was well balanced. He was sane. He was poised. And his character, in fact, was perfect. There was absolutely nothing psychopathic or schizophrenic about him. He never acted as though he was walking in a dream or a trance. And Jesus received all of his guidance by God through prayer. And I think when we understand that the disciples never said to Jesus, look, show me, how did you do that miracle? How did you do that miracle? Let me see. Hey, show me how. I want to find out the secret of this. Instead, they said, teach us to. There was the key. So we want to understand that when we are entering into the things of the Spirit, the secret of success in the other gifts of the Spirit is your prayer life. Now, we've been discussing praying in the Spirit in our own private life. I want to go into the discussion of praying in the Spirit in the church. This is very important. When you're praying in your private prayer life, nobody's supposed to hear you. It's all on your own. You enter into your closet and pray in secret, and he which sees in secret is going to reward you openly. Now, but there is a place in the church for tongues. So what place is it? Will you turn then to Mark chapter 16, verse 17. And it refers to the fact that these signs shall follow them that believe. In my name they shall speak with new tongues. It's a sign that will follow the believers and should follow the believers. But I also want you to turn to 1 Corinthians 14. And we're going to see something extra here in this discussion as well. Verses 22 and 23. Wherefore tongues are for a sign, not to them that believe, but to them that believe not. But prophesying serve not for them that believe not, but for them which believe. Therefore, if the whole church come together into one place, and all speak with tongues, and there come in those that are unlearned or unbelievers, will they not say they are mad? But if all prophesy, and there come in one that believes not, or one unlearned, he is convinced of all, and he is judged of all. Now, I would like to ask you, what is the purpose of the church? Why do we come to church? Why is the church established anyway? No matter what denomination, why do we go to church? What is the church for? Can you think of some reasons? Come on, think of them real fast. To worship, to praise, to fellowship. Oh, there's all sorts of reasons. You still haven't given me the real true reason that the church was basically established yet. To be a witness for the purpose of winning souls. That is the main purpose. And then, of course, the people are supposed to come into the church then to receive Christ and to be built up in faith. Now, the church is not supposed to be a museum for the saints. It's a hospital for the sinners, and let's get that established. You know, I got to throw this in for free. I know that there are some that are watching and they're saying, oh, the church is full of hypocrites. Look, that's where the hypocrites belong in church. You want me to know why I'm saying that? Because they need help. They need to go to church, and hopefully the Word of God will convict them and touch them so that they'll no longer be hypocrites. But the sinner belongs in church, and a hypocrite is a sinner. And they need help. And one day a man said to me, he says, oh, all these hypocrites in church. And I said, well, you know, they're bad people, obviously. This is the church is for sinners. I said, it's just good people like you that are outside the church. You don't need the church because you feel that you're good enough and you don't need it. He said, well, I'm not all that good. So, I'm not good enough. I need to go to church. I still have to have a pastor. I still need help. I'm still growing in the things of God. And there are people that maybe try to impress you as being perfect, but we know that there are no perfect Christians in the church. They love God and they're trying to grow. So we'll establish that. I just threw that in for free. I do this every once in a while. Now, so the church now is to bring in unsaved souls, right? There was one woman I know that she was sitting in the church and she was praying, oh Lord, you know, don't let any of these terrible, horrible people come into the church. This is where we want such a nice time of fellowship with you and everything's so peaceful. And I go, my goodness sakes, hello there. If we get to this place that the church becomes this, nothing but a nice organization, we have lost the purpose of the church. And so it is that we're supposed to have unbelievers coming into the church. Now my Bible tells me here that tongues are for a sign. Not to them that believe, but to them that believe not. Now, they're supposed to come into the church, you see. What's a sign? Okay, you came over to the session this morning, and you're looking at the road signs. Now, there's a certain street. Yes, I'm supposed to turn up that street. And there's another street. Oh, yes, that's another street. And I'm going over to where the studio is. See? You're following the signs in order to get to the place where you're going. The sign is not the place. It's not the destination, right? The sign is leading you to the destination. That's what it's talking about here. These signs shall follow them that believe, but also it says that the tongues are for a sign, pointing you in the direction of Jesus Christ, so that when you exercise the gifts of the Spirit, and in this case tongues, in an assembly, it's supposed to draw people to Christ. It's supposed to be a sign to lead people to Christ, not to chase them away. Oh, my. Now, you're wanting your church built up, are you? You're wanting to see the people of God growing, huh? You're wanting to see new people coming in? They're looking for the signs that are pointing them to Jesus Christ. Why are we taking the road signs away from them? They have to see them. They've got to see them in order to know where the direction is. That's why many of them are being lost along the way. They're not being directed in the right way. So now let's begin to enter into exercising this as a sign to the unbelievers. We're supposed to be having lots of them come into the church to get converted because they're hungry and they're crying in the night. There are so many, and I know that there are many that are watching right now that you're suffering from drugs, from addiction of many kinds. You're suffering from weaknesses of the flesh. You're saying, look, I can't stand this anymore. I can't tolerate life anymore. I need somebody to help. Won't somebody help? You're wanting a sign to point you in the direction of Jesus Christ. I pray above everything else that when you go into an assembly, you will see those signs that will direct you into the way of the living Christ and deliver you from those things that you're suffering from right now. Now, it says here that if indeed we exercise them as they should be done, they will not chase people away, but rather draw others unto a knowledge of Christ. Now, if it says here that if people come in, now that's talking about the church, and let's not forget this. If therefore the whole church be come together into one place, and all are speaking with tongues, and there come those that are unlearned and unbelievers, And they're all doing it out of order. Now, it's not saying not doing it in its proper place. It's saying out of order. If all of us here are talking away in tongues and doing this, and others are coming and they'll say, look, they're nuts. They're kooks. They're way out. Well, that's what I thought when I first heard it, because it wasn't done in, let's say, an orderly fashion, or it wasn't done properly or in order. And so you can't blame them for coming in and seeing such a thing and saying, now look, this is just too far out. I just can't go along with that at all. We believe that the Spirit of God is harmonious. He's harmonious. He's not in contention of any kind or disruption. There is something that I think maybe I ought to just again throw in for free. What about the singing in the Spirit that we have in our assemblies today, and praying in the Spirit? We're doing it as a body. Well, let's go to the football game if you like. And we find that when they get ready for the huddle, you know, and everybody's quiet, nobody's saying anything. But then there's the kickoff. And then something happens. The crowd goes wild. They jump up and down, and oh, they get so excited, they really go to town, don't they? Huh? All right, they're moving in unison, in one accord. They're wanting some goals. That's what they're wanting. Now, if somebody, if say they're in the huddle again, and only one individual starts to holler and scream and shout, they will say what? He is a fanatic, right? The same thing applies in the church. If we're not going to move as a body of believers in these things, then of course it's going to be a disjointed thing. It's going to be something that's not going to be acceptable. Again, when I was in the West Indies, you know, I heard these beautiful people praying in the Spirit, singing in the Spirit. If I ever could say I heard angels' wings, I'd say that's what it sounded like. Just angels' wings fluttering. It was absolutely beautiful. Just, oh, it was gorgeous. And I think some of you have probably heard this. Maybe some of you never have. I've also heard people speaking in tongues en masse in a time of praise. And I'm talking about a time of worship and praise now here. And when it's done en masse, speaking in tongues, it sounds like the rushing of mighty waters. It's spectacular. And it lifts the soul and lifts the spirit, and that's in a time of worship and praise. I don't think that's what Paul was talking about. I think he was referring altogether to something completely different. Have you ever sat in front of somebody and you're trying to hear the sermon and you got somebody behind you either speaking in tongues or saying, yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, Lord. And it's so distracting and it is out of place completely, and you'd like to turn around and say, honey, please, please, cool it. Well, we know that there can be much that's done out of order. This is what we're trying to avoid, the things that are out of order. So I think this is what Paul is talking about. And he says, since no one is understanding what you're saying, then let's try to avoid all of this confusion. So he's concerned here now about the unbelievers and the unlearned. Who are the unlearned? Well, they are those then who have never been trained in the gifts of the Spirit or the things of the Spirit. They've come to a knowledge of Christ, but they're unlearned in those things. That was my place when I first heard these things. And I was really turned off with it. I was unlearned when I heard it used out of order. But when I heard it in order, being unlearned, I thought, hey, isn't that neat? Man, that sounds great. I was drawn to it. And that's what we're supposed to have. The gifts of the Spirit are not to repel. In fact, the fruits of the Spirit must be very evident with the gifts of the Spirit. If they're not, something's wrong. And as you exercise the gifts of the Spirit, they're supposed to draw people to Christ. Everywhere I've gone, in meetings, mass meetings, in campaigns, anywhere, wherever the gifts of the Spirit have been exercised, it has drawn people. It has never repelled them. Because I believe when they're done decently, sanely, and in order, people get excited about it. And they know indeed that this has got to be something that's born of God. When we look at fanaticism a little bit, you know, some of the things that used to turn me off. The first place I was ever taught these gifts of the Spirit, I'd gone into a church. And I saw these gifts exercised. Oh, it was beautiful. I was drawn to them. I was so excited about it. But I had to go that afternoon over to a neighbor's place and to stay and then come back to the meeting after. And I got on the city bus and I sat right at the back of the bus. And as I sat at the back of the bus, this one woman came down from the same meeting that I was in. She attended the very same one. She had come down into the bus, and I thought, oh boy, look at this one. She has a little cane in her hand. I've got a ruler here, but she had a little cane in her hand. And she was going along the bus like this, and she was tapping people on the wrist. And she would talk in tongues. Are you a Christian? Do you know Jesus as your personal Savior? and she'd jabber away in tongues again, and she'd jab someone else with her little cane. She carried this little cane. It was her trademark. And she'd say, do you know Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? Well, you better accept him today. And then she would talk to somebody else, and she'd jab them. And I kind of squished down in my seat, and I said, oh boy, I hope she doesn't come back here. Well, she was a fanatic. But you see, I said to myself, well, boy, if everybody's like that comes out of there, who needs it? What I didn't know was that this woman, they called her the town crier. She used to go from church to church, making havoc. And she would do things out of order all the time, constantly out of order. But when she went into that assembly, this man used to know her, and he had told her several times in public to please refrain from getting so demonstrative. But when she got out of the building, she made good use of her time. Well, I found that out later, but I was beginning to wonder. I was also in an assembly one time, and it's a beautiful assembly, and I know God uses us no matter what situation we're in. No one assembly has all the answers. That's why we've got many varieties of churches, so that we can meet all the needs of all the people wherever they go. But I went into this assembly, and indeed they were moving in the things of God. But they also had a public, or the prayer meeting, which was, I believe in this case, too close to the rest of the main auditorium. Of course, they believed in making lots of noise when they prayed, and they entered into it in gusto. And as I came by the window and by the place there, I heard the praying. Now, to me, and I thought that I pretty well could understand a lot of things, but this was almost too much. There was the loud moaning and groaning, and I thought, what's going on in there? You know, it just sounded horrible. Didn't sound like a sense of praise of this nature. We got into the assembly and sat down, and there were some people behind me that were new there. In fact, this was about the second time I'd even sat in that assembly. The doors, they had a door on the side where the people were, and this is where these people were that were praying. You could still hear it sort of faintly into the main auditorium. And finally, an usher came out, and he opened these doors back, and he starts praying in tongues, or praying in the Spirit, or speaking in tongues, right out into the main auditorium before the meeting had ever started. And I was offended by this. I really was. It was rather, crude, I thought. And the people behind me, I heard them say, oh my goodness, what is going on back there? And all the sound of this moaning and groaning came out of this room. Now, I can appreciate prayer meetings, and I believe before meetings start, many assemblies want to have a prayer meeting, and that's good. But by the same token, if you're going to pray and pray in the Spirit, please, let's not have unlearned and unbelievers hearing this sort of thing, because it's going to turn them off. It's going to be offensive. We don't want anything to offend the people of God. Now, I'm just throwing something in for free. Some people say, well, can't we get into a Christian prayer meeting and have pray in the Spirit and everybody praying in tongues? Well, we've said to you before that praying in tongues is building up yourself in your most holy faith. Isn't that correct? Yes. So I'm asking you, why all get together then and pray in tongues? Why don't you do it in your closet at home and do it effectively? And when you come together, then pray with your understanding so that everybody will be edified by it. And if indeed you decide to get together in a Christian prayer meeting and have your prayers, then please, okay, let's get with it and not have unlearned or unbelievers in, because they're going to say, look, that's not right, and I don't like it, and they're going to be chased away. We want you to be drawn to the Spirit of God. God bless you.